There was one thing I was reading that I can't remember where, but I think it was from them, which related to something Stephen had said quite a long time ago, and it was a quote that I hadn't seen, but it was about very much about the dynamic, creative nature of Dharma as he sees it. And it reminded me of the session that he did on poetry in one of our modules, where we were all, and he did express a few times that he was encouraging us to find creative endeavors through which you could express the Dharma, or the Dharma could be expressed, or something. And he often talked about his own work in writing, but also in the collages that he made, which were related to Dharma. So I think that you're right. It probably is the fact that he's got some links into that, or some strong influence behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But suits me. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's really, I think it is one of the most, it's a bit like Zen, isn't it? Which also went into more of a creative side of things, coming out of the very dogmatic Indian subcontinent way of doing Buddhism. It was one time before, creativity was one part of a renewal movement of the Dharma, wasn't it? I think in that it took that in, and as Zen, as this kind of coming back to principles, but also opening out to creativity. That's what I, this in this movement east to Japan, and so I think that might be a nice movement again. I wonder if they come together like that is because to rethink the Dharma, that is a creative process, isn't it? As soon as you stick your neck out from the dogma, you're already in a creative process. You have to rethink how that looks. And it might be more pictorial than we first aware of, because we think with all our senses in that way, imagining something new. I'm still kind of, this just comes just out of contemplating, calling it creative Dharma. I think there's something actually in it in that way, that might be more to the core of things, of what we're trying to do there, than it first. You could say, well, creativity is one part of it, but why should it be in the title? And actually, I'm just mulling it over, why it definitely should be in the title.
Well,
Because actually,
I think it must. I mean, I think it's for what I've been thinking about recently. It seems to be entirely logical and in tune with what we're talking about. That what we are doing is, in fact, and what everybody does is essentially a creative process.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole sort of. I mean, I've talked a little bit about biological evolution. We also have a cultural evolution, and Dharma is part of that creative process. We are in the act of recreating. It's like having ideas. It's like just like in the biological metaphor, the ultimate sort of objective of life is to sort of pass on genes to the next generation. With cultural evolution, it's about passing on ideas into the next generation.
Yeah.
So basically, this comes back to sort of this idea of legacy. What do we leave behind? Do we leave ideas behind? Do we leave feelings behind? And all that is, I think, a wholly creative process.
And it is a liberation, a creative process, isn't it? It is really the opposite of the dogmatic state of believe this and we know best, with all its connotations of patriarchy and all that stuff. and to go into, when it's creative, by default, it has to be individual and a very personal process of, okay, what makes sense to me? How do I express this? Not how it is expressed, because there's all these rituals that I follow, and the individual doesn't matter. It just follows the same old ritual, like in lots of religions. It has to be always the same. There's no creativity in sight, and it is discouraged. So it is very fundamental to what we're doing. Don't you think that it's interesting that Stephen is at his best and forthright when he talks about the old style Dharma, Buddhism, and contrasting it with a new intellectual framework? Then it is very assured. And then when he did go into creative things like write a poem, or, you know, he encourages Rupert very much to do the drawing thing. He was open to a session of letting other people's creativity shine, but he gets less and less reassured there. He does it tentatively. He doesn't talk about his own art with gusto, not in the same way as he does with his intellectual compare and contrast things or so. He loses all his chutzpah when he goes into does it feel to you like that? Or do you
I think you're right. I think
strong?
he's less in control, and it's, but that's the very nature of the creative process, is that you have the whole point is that you have to lose control. You have to let something else take over. If you're pursuing something in a academic, scholarly way, then you're always in control, because you're in control of everything and of all of the information, of all of the sources, and how they're all put together in a logical way, in a rational way. But if you're moving to a creative standpoint, and that becomes the essence of what you're doing, then you have no idea what the outcomes are going to be. You have no control over that, because that's the nature of being creative. So when you set off to write a poem, you don't know what the result's going to be. You don't know whether you're going to produce a poem. You have no, and you don't know it's going to be any good. So, whereas if you're going to write a book on the history of Buddhism, and you know a lot about it, you're probably fairly sure in the first place it's going to be, relatively successful. Every time I I have a pencil in my hand and a white sheet of paper, I have no idea that what I'm going to do. And when I do it, it was interesting doing it with groups of people who are all watching my hand move. And I'm not even able to see what my pencil is doing, because the point is I'm not looking at the paper, I'm just looking at the head. And it sort of gets to you, you think, oh, blimey, what am I doing here? Because you have to keep expressing the point for me about this, is that whatever's happening on the piece of paper is not important, because it's all what's going on in your seeing, how you see things. But nevertheless, I'm making marks and people are looking at the marks. And I don't know what the result of those marks is until I look at them after they've seen them, because I'm used to doing it. But even when I did it the first time, I was nervous. I was like, and I thought, why am I nervous? I do this all the time. Why am I nervous? I'm not now, but I imagine that if you're not used to doing it, then it could be very nerve-wracking, because you're letting go. You're having to, you're a teacher, but you're saying, well, actually, I'm not quite sure what the results of this session are going to be. So I don't know. Where is my trust? What am I trusting in? Trusting in a process which is open-ended. I don't know the outcome. So I can see why. And that's why, again, I'm so impressed by him, that he does go off into these fields. And when I've read some of the stuff he's done, and I said, actually, most of the things you talk about, Stephen, you know way, way more than I do. But actually, you're talking about stuff that I know about. And some of they say, actually, I know more about this than you. And then actually, that bit, you're not right. That bit is wrong. But he's prepared to do it. He's prepared to put forward
Yeah.
his opinions. He's prepared to say that about things. And that's part of the Dharma. I think that's it's one of the most impressive things, is that yes, he wants to be in control, and yes, but he's also prepared to be open. And I listened to the last module again because I wanted to hear, it was Gary's presentation, and I wanted to go back to how people were responding to that. And Stephen talked quite a lot in that session about how he was listening to us and how he was learning from us and how he was changing because of the things that he was hearing. And he also said it's not always easy to hear the criticisms or breed criticisms, but that's part of it. So I was impressed that because it's not in your nature to work in a particular way, that's even more difficult to go and try and work in that area, which is a field where you're not comfortable.
He has actually. He has opened to that, and it shows that he doesn't feel all that secure in it. But that's rather charming, isn't it?
Yeah. It's very courageous, I think. It's to do it. And going back to what you were saying about when the Zen, well, when it moved to Chan and Zen Buddhism, I think another aspect of the creative side of that is the questioning aspect, that everything becomes a question.
Yes, nice one.
Because within the nature of questioning is the point is you don't know the answer. And the other side of it, which came up when you were talking about that, was what they're called koans.
Koans?
I can't remember. I'm not a good for words. Koans, where there is sort of built into it a non-answer that can be interpreted. But the point about them is that they're not a question with an answer. They're a question which opens up to exploration. And whilst you can come back with something which is, this is a sort of, but in order to get to whatever you're getting to, you will have to undergo a creative endeavor. It's not like a puzzle where you can follow the steps through the puzzle, like a crossword puzzle or something.
Yeah.
It's something where the outcome will be different for everybody. So it's like a presentation of a invitation to a process, which seems to me very different from the way that we traditionally see a Buddhist doctrine, which is not an invitation to a process. It's an invitation to accept a position. And again, that seems to resonate with the way that Stephen has changed things from truths to tasks, and even better when Alfie's changed them to skills, which is more pertinent again. Because a skill is a part, you cannot have a skill, you have to use the skill.
Wow, I love that.
Well, one of the things about religion is the search for stasis. I find that, people do not like change. I've been discovering that with my kids just recently. And Indonesians in particular really don't like change. They react very poorly to any sort of, even the mildest change in an office or a workplace or in a household. They don't like change. Babies, they don't like change. My youngest, for example, if he sees a stranger, he'll start crying straight away. Which is very basically a toddler at that age is basically trying to grasp onto something static. They don't like people coming in and out of their environment. They want familiarity. They don't want surprises. They just want everything just to say the way it is. And that's the way that I sort of sometimes feel about people who feel the need to sort of hold on to religion. They need something to hold on to. They need some sort of stasis so that they can maneuver and function.
Well, isn't that interesting? And the world is moving and the tasks are moving all the time in that VUCA way, and you're desperate. What we are conditioned into is to desperately look for that stability, that fix point from which we can survey it all and find a strategy, instead of building that float or so that can just weather it in that way and have the skill of maneuvering through it on an ever changing basis, really, not minding that. Yeah. Do you think that's an evolutionary thing then? Or is it just cultures go through different highs and lows with being all right with uncertainty?
Well, certainly the different cultures have got their different ways of dealing with change and stability and things like that. I mean, but I think in general, I mean, people are sort of born with this thing to sort of seek stasis, seek stability, seek something to attach to hold on to, because the world is just so wild and out of control that I need something to center myself. So that's sort of sometimes how I feel about people who feel a need for a religion or feel a need to have a certain set of beliefs, because they need that sort of attachment to maintain some semblance of stability in their life, I guess. Whereas in fact that stasis is fictional. It doesn't exist. There is no stasis. It's all movement. It's all it's all evolution. It's all it's always there basically is no stasis, but we yearn for that stasis.
I mean, from an evolutionary point of view, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the fact that we take in only a very tiny amount of information from all the information that's available to us, potentially, because if we had it all, there would be absolutely no way to cope. It would just be far too much information going on. If you knew and saw all of the things that were around you all the time, or heard and took in all of the sounds, it would be crazy. You just couldn't operate. So we have to filter out 99% of the information that we potentially were accessible to. And so in the similar way, that sort of suggests that we want to filter out all the changes and all of the different things that are going on, so that we can settle and we can see, we can cope. So yes, I think it probably does make sense that it's evolutionary. But on the other hand, we also have evolved brains that are capable of creative thought, probably not entirely just by accident, but it lends to changes that we can make with not knowing the outcome. And that is the opposite of stability, which is why I guess we're quite sort of tentative about it. But on the other hand, we culturally now we think of it as being not only sort of viable, but something that to aspire to. And I don't think that's been the case culturally before. Well, it doesn't look like it from the artifacts that most cultures produce. For instance, when I went to India a couple of years ago, I was I'm very interested in architecture and old architecture, and you know, I thought this is going to be really interesting. So I went to the Mughal forts, and the first one you see, you think, wow, this is incredible, and you go to the next one, you think, this is also incredible, but it's sort of very similarly incredible to the first one I saw. And then you sort of look at dates, and there's one that's 200 years after the first one you saw, and there's another one that's 400 years after the first one you saw, and yet they're virtually identical. There's small changes in the detailing, but overall architectural styles haven't changed. And this is very similar to ancient Egyptian architecture and what's left of Persian architecture. Use brick, so there isn't much left. And it's because I was thinking about it that those who decide what the architecture or the visual outcomes of their culture are going to be are those people who are in charge, and they have so much control that they can dictate how things are going to be. But when you get a culture where there is less dictation from above as to how things will appear, in a culture where there is more independence, for instance, then there is a much wider variety of architectural outcome. And so it seems to me that it is culturally dependent, the level of creativity that you are allowed, if you like. It's not to say that the potential wasn't there, but you don't have a way of expressing that creative potential. And it's only in some cultures where that becomes possible, and where it becomes so. Even in the British Museum just recently, and the British Museum and the V&A both had exhibitions of Japanese artifacts, and they were absolutely beautiful, exquisite pieces. But there is no Renaissance in Japanese artifacts production. There is a continuous thread of work, and you can see the themes that develop and, if you like, evolve over time. But there's no revolution. There's no point in it where there was an explosion of creative ideas or everything changed, as there is in Western culture. Western culture has the Renaissance, and everything changes after the Renaissance. All architecture, all painting, sculpture, everything changes within a 100-year period. And it's to do with the economic changes. It's to do with the fact that you basically had a middle class who could afford to pay for things and hire artists to do what they wanted, rather than being dictated by the church or by the state. I'm pretty sure this is the case. And that allows the individual expression, and that allows individual creativity. And so I don't know where I'm going with that, but it's interesting.
Well, can I pull you up and ask you, I mean, is there really an individual creativity?
Well, individuals can be creative. I think
but individuals are immersed in cultures, in groups, in societies. They are products of those societies and groups. So to what extent are they individual, and to what extent are they just expressions of the groups that they happen to be associated with?
There's no doubt that the only things that you get out of creative endeavor are things that you put in. And those things that you put in come from the culture, that come from, well, your genes have a say in it, but yes. But it's the arrangement of the things that come out, which is the creative expression. And if you're not allowed to have a different outcome to those things that were there before, then your creativity is being suppressed, if you like. It's, or maybe not suppressed, but not given the opportunity for expression. And what's happened since the Renaissance in Western culture has been the opportunity for more individuals to express their creativity. So I don't think it's it's different for anybody. It's just that you're not given the opportunity to express it. But the process itself is one that everybody has to a degree, but it's a bit like the ability to learn a language or the ability to do maths or programming or to do anything. Some of us have got better levels of it, or high levels of capability and lower levels, but we can all do it to an extent. That's certainly been my experience in teaching it, is that you can see it, then it's in everybody, but some people have a greater facility, that's all. And that facility, like most facilities, can be improved with practice. But that's, I say, that's sort of slightly different from the idea that you have. It gets back to Elfie's point about, by moving into a different era, a different culture, the Dharma changes. And this does seem to be a time where it also relates back to what when you wrote down my Dharma instead of a Dharma, which you changed from the Dharma. And that seemed to me to be, looking at it in retrospect, is that creative process from being a fixed thing to being a slightly open to thing to being completely individual thing. And that is really saying that the outcome, we can all put stuff in, but what's going to come out of that is going to be individual. And that individuality is an expression of creative processing, individual creative processing.
Yeah, well, this is probably, I think about the creative process as partly or mainly synthesis. Basically, drawing things from your experience and from your imagination and putting them together, which sort of has led me to have lots of arguments with my artist friends about their copyrights. But I sort of have maintained this, there is nothing new under the sun. Everything's been done. That's just a new mix. That doesn't make very, of course, there's a creative synthesis, of course, and that the synthesis, if it's sufficiently unique, constitutes a work of art, if you want.
Anyway, I have to go as well. Right. Look at that. I just love how these meetings go, because you really never know where we end up. And we check in and we seem to just go nowhere, just talk about God and the world. And suddenly it takes off into a situation where I scribble wildly and say, I mustn't forget that. That's so good. And it's really so fantastic. I love that about our group. Oh, cool.
Right, lovely to see you.
And thank you, darlings. That was amazing. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.